Something extraordinary just happened. And by extraordinary, I don't mean another dusty telescope photo of a faint smudge in the sky, or yet another press release about possible traces of water on some distant moon. No, what I mean is that humanity just got punched in the face by an object so bizarre, so physics-breaking, so downright alien-looking, that the data pouring in from telescopes around the world doesn't just strain belief, it annihilates it. The new 3I/Atlas measurements are not simply numbers on a screen. They are a death knell for the neat little universe we thought we lived in, the one where comets behave like comets, where trajectories follow predictable Newtonian lines, where chemistry obeys the same rules from Mercury to Neptune. The universe has just thrown down its ace card. And if the implications are even halfway true, then we're not staring at a frozen ball of gas and ice. We may be staring at a reconnaissance machine, a fragment of alien engineering, or worse, the opening move of a cosmic game that started long before Earth even learned how to read the stars. The headline number that has everyone in shock, 3I/Atlas, isn't behaving like an interstellar comet at all. In fact, the new data released this week from the James Webb Space Telescope, the European Southern Observatory, and an independent network of ground-based sensors in Hawaii and Chile has confirmed that the brightness variations, thermal signature, and trajectory of the object are completely incompatible with a natural origin. How incompatible? Try this. The photometric analysis suggests an albedo, a reflectivity, that spikes at intervals of exactly 11 minutes and 32 seconds. 11 minutes, 32 seconds, on repeat, across 3 weeks of observation. That is not random tumbling. That is not chaotic outgassing. That is not the behavior of any natural body ever observed. That is the signature of a rotating structure, deliberately stabilized with surfaces engineered to bounce light in repeating patterns. To put it bluntly, comets don't strobe, but surveillance satellites do. And then there's the mass problem, the one that no one in government wants to talk about, the one that is already causing hushed emergency meetings at the Pentagon, ESA headquarters, and Beijing's National Space Science Center. When 3I/Atlas's gravitational effects were measured against the background field of nearby asteroids, the numbers came back horrifying. The thing weighs an estimated 33 billion tons, give or take a few billion. That's the equivalent of 66 billion elephants, or enough steel to build every skyscraper in New York City 100 times over. According to planetary formation theory, no body that massive should ever have been ejected from its parent star system intact. It would require an expulsion event so violent that it would destabilize the entire planetary disk. Statistically, it's not just rare, it's impossible. And yet here it is, cruising through our solar system, glowing like a torch in the dark. If that mass estimate is correct, and the triangulated data says it is, then either we're witnessing a flaw in everything we know about planetary formation, or we're looking at a construct. Let's talk about that glow. Normally, a comet this far from the sun should be dormant, just a lump of ice and dust, invisible until solar heating vaporizes its surface. But 3I/Atlas was already blazing when we caught it. Not just visible, brilliant. Spectrographic data reveals an energy output equivalent to several megawatts, sustained over weeks, with no visible fuel source. NASA analysts have quietly admitted in leaked memos that the infrared signature doesn't match sublimating ice at all. It looks closer to, wait for it, a thermal radiator, a piece of machinery shedding waste heat into space. In fact, the temperature variations observed are eerily similar to spacecraft thermal management systems we ourselves build for long-duration missions, except ours are primitive by comparison. We need massive radiators and constant power supply. 3i/Atlas seems to be doing it elegantly, effortlessly, as if it's designed to cross interstellar distances without ever breaking a sweat. The real nightmare begins when you combine these anomalies with its trajectory. Unlike Oumuamua or 2i/Borisov, both of which had hyperbolic flyby paths consistent with random wanderers, 3i/Atlas has threaded a route through the solar system so precise, so optimized for planetary encounters, that orbital mechanics experts are using phrases like non-ballistic course and stealth insertion window. Here's the chilling part. In October, it will swing within 30 million kilometers of Mars. 30 million. That's closer than Earth has been in half its recorded history. And right now, every orbiter, rover, and satellite we've stationed around the red planet is being retasked to watch it. Think about the timing. Mars, the one world we've filled with hardware, the one staging ground for our future colonization. And suddenly, an interstellar comet just happens to thread past it at optimal observing distance. If that doesn't look like reconnaissance, I don't know what does. But here's the kicker, the piece of data that has veteran scientists openly admitting they don't sleep at night anymore. The chemical profile. Most comets are loaded with water, ice, dust, and carbon-based volatiles. But 3i/Atlas, 81% of its volatile mass is carbon dioxide ice, a ratio so extreme that no known solar system body comes close. That wouldn't just make it unique, it makes it implausible. To get a body that carbon dioxide rich, you'd need formation in a star system with chemical conditions so alien, so radically different, that it rewrites our models of planetary chemistry. But there's another interpretation. The surface isn't carbon dioxide at all. It's a mask, a camouflage layer designed to mimic cometary emissions, while beneath it lies something else, possibly metallic, possibly engineered, possibly alive. Now picture this. On September 25th, the sun hurled a massive coronal mass ejection, a billion tons of plasma, screaming across space, directly into the path of 3i/Atlas. For any normal comet, this would have been a death sentence. The coma should have flared, fragmented, shredded into a cloud of dust. Instead, 3i/Atlas shrugged it off. The light curve barely flickered. The tail remained intact. It behaved, in other words, like a fortress with mass and cohesion orders of magnitude beyond a fragile snowball of ice. If this thing is natural, it's the most indestructible rock in the galaxy. If it isn't, then it was built to withstand worse than the sun itself. And here's where things get frightening. On October 30th, it reaches perihelion, its closest approach to the sun, but from Earth's perspective, it will be hidden behind the solar disk. That means for 2 whole months, while it's undergoing maximum heating and maximum activity, we won't see it. Our best telescopes will be blind. If you were designing a probe to execute a trajectory change, to brake, to capture, to redirect into permanent solar orbit, you couldn't pick a better moment. The sun itself becomes your camouflage. When it emerges again in December, its course may be the same, or it may not. By then, it could be bound to the sun, co-orbiting with Earth, or worse, on a path directly toward us. Governments are preparing, though they'll never admit it out loud. The European Space Agency has already repositioned its JUICE spacecraft to maximize observation. Mars orbiters have been ordered into standby, and leaked documents from NASA suggest contingency briefings are being held on scenarios ranging from continued flyby to potential artificial intelligence encounter. That last phrase should chill you to your core. Because the only reason an alien probe would come this close, at this time, on this trajectory, is if it's watching us, measuring us, deciding what we are. So let's recap. A 33 billion ton object glowing like a machine, radiating heat in unnatural patterns, strobing at regular intervals, immune to solar plasma, packed with chemical signatures that don't belong in any natural cometary recipe, threading a path optimized for planetary observation and disappearing at the one moment we'd need to see it most. That's not just strange, that's strategic. And the new data doesn't whisper this possibility, it screams it. And yet the official line from NASA? It's a comet, nothing to worry about. That's the exact phrase they used about Oumuamua. That's the phrase they always use, because the alternative would cause panic. But you don't have to be a Harvard astrophysicist or a Pentagon analyst to see what's unfolding. The shocking possibility revealed by the latest 3I/Atlas data isn't just that we've discovered a new kind of comet, it's that we're not alone, that we never were, and that someone or something has finally decided to check in on its noisy, radioactive, war-prone neighbors circling a small yellow star. The real question isn't whether 3I/Atlas is alien. The real question is, what happens next? The deeper one digs into the new streams of telemetry, the stranger and more unsettling the picture becomes. Astronomers, physicists, and military analysts on 3 continents are quietly describing a pattern of impossible signals coming from 3I/Atlas's vicinity. Pulses buried in the noise floor of radio observatories that shouldn't exist, faint spikes across multiple wavelengths, timed to the object's 11-minute reflectivity cycle. Individually, each spike could be dismissed as interference or cosmic background fluctuation. Collectively, they form a lattice of repeating ratios and intervals. It's the sort of thing SETI has been searching for since the 1960s, except it's coming from a body we can see, track, and almost reach with our own spacecraft. You can hear the unease in the voices of the few scientists who've dared to hint at it in public forums. They know the data will be denied, ridiculed, buried under official explanations. But privately, among encrypted email chains and off-record phone calls, the same words keep coming up again and again: pattern, intelligence, reconnaissance. The logistics of how such a thing would work are as breathtaking as the implications. A mass of 33 billion tons moving at interstellar velocity isn't just a vessel, it's a worldlet. It's the kind of structure you'd hollow out if you wanted to cross light years without anyone noticing. Our own species is still struggling to move a few tons beyond the moon, but the engineering logic is straightforward. Take a small asteroid, dig out the interior, fill it with propulsion systems, shielding, and habitats, and coat it in a layer of inert cometary ice for camouflage. To any primitive telescopes, it looks like a natural object, but inside, it's a starship, a listening post, a city in the dark. Science fiction authors have been imagining ice ships for decades. The difference is that now one is actually gliding past Mars, while every major power on Earth insists it's just a comet. And then there's the nickel without iron anomaly, buried in the new spectral data. In every natural object we've ever sampled, from meteorites to the most remote comets, nickel and iron come hand in hand, forged together in the hearts of dying stars. But 3I/Atlas shows nickel lines with no corresponding iron absorption. That's not just weird, it's industrial. On Earth, the only places you see nickel so cleanly separated are in high-temperature refining processes, in superalloys for turbines, in the kinds of heat-resistant materials you'd use if you wanted your spacecraft skin to survive decades in hard radiation. Imagine a civilization millions of years ahead of ours, doing asteroid-scale engineering the way we lay asphalt. They wouldn't even think about how strange it would look to our sensors. They'd just build what they need, and now, thanks to their carelessness or their confidence, we're seeing it. Governments are acting like they're not worried, but the telltale signs of emergency mobilization are everywhere. Amateur satellite trackers have documented classified launches in the past few weeks, payloads from Vandenberg, Kourou, Baikonur, ostensibly communication satellites, but on trajectories that would give them long, unobstructed views of 3I/Atlas's path. Rumors are swirling of hastily convened panels inside NASA and the Department of Defense under code names like Project Sentinel and Deep Guest. On social media, leaks appear for a few hours before being scrubbed. Blurry images of slide decks, diagrams of orbital rendezvous plans, even a few grainy frames purporting to show a fast flyer departing Earth orbit on a Mars intercept trajectory. Nobody can confirm if the images are real, but the timing is uncanny. The thing that terrifies the insiders the most isn't what 3I/Atlas has done so far. It's what it's about to do when it slips behind the sun. Every model, every simulation, every historical comet track says it should re-emerge on the far side in December on the same hyperbolic path, outbound forever. But if it's not a natural body, that's the perfect moment to light whatever drive it uses, shed the ice mask, and disappear from our instruments. It could break into a bound solar orbit, station keep at one of the Lagrange points, rendezvous with something already here. We wouldn't know until weeks later. It's the kind of maneuver our own planners have dreamt about for decades, but can't pull off because our technology is nowhere near that level. An interstellar civilization could do it casually, the way we parallel park a car. And the timing. Oh, the timing. Based on its inbound speed, 3I/Atlas would have crossed the heliopause, the edge of the sun's magnetic bubble, roughly 8,000 years ago. That's right around the time Homo sapiens went from scattered hunter-gatherers to city builders, when our first monuments rose, when our radio signature was still thousands of years away, but our technological trajectory was unmistakable to any watchers with sensitive enough instruments. If you were charting young civilizations in the galaxy, you'd send probes to promising worlds long before they achieved interstellar travel, long before they could shoot back. They'd arrive just as the civilization reached a tipping point, just as it filled its orbit with satellites, just as it learned to split atoms and encode genomes, just as it became interesting. Does that sound familiar? The public isn't being told this. Instead, the narrative is largest interstellar comet ever seen, unique opportunity for science, with carefully worded reassurances about no threat to Earth and completely natural origin. But buried in the technical appendices of obscure conference papers are the smoking guns, radar cross-sections that change in ways consistent with controlled orientation, polarization signatures that oscillate like phased array antennas, low-frequency emissions at bands reserved for deep space communication. It's all there, hiding in plain sight for anyone who knows how to read it. The press just doesn't know what to ask, or maybe it's been told not to. Meanwhile, the object keeps flashing its enigmatic 11-minute signal like a heartbeat in the void. Maybe it's an accident, some artifact of alien engineering. Maybe it's a deliberate message, or maybe it's a countdown. The data that has been kept off the public dashboards, the readings siphoned straight from the Deep Space Network and routed to military-only servers, paints a picture even more unnerving than the first leaks. Engineers at Goldstone and Canberra have been ordered to scrub certain bands from their published logs. The reason, every time a planetary radar ping goes out, the echo from 3I/Atlas comes back not only stronger than expected, but with phase distortions that look uncannily like active shaping. In other words, the comet isn't just reflecting our signals, it's manipulating them. Anyone who's ever worked with stealth aircraft or phased array radars recognizes the signature immediately, a system designed to control its radar cross-section, to decide what an observer sees. Natural ice balls do not do that. If inside the secure facilities where these echoes are being analyzed, a picture is forming of an object that is not just big, but structured. Variations in its brightness and polarization hint at facets, panels, and edges kilometers long. Models built by independent researchers using the same light curve data reproduce not a sphere or potato-shaped comet, but a kind of elongated shell, with symmetrical protrusions at intervals too regular to be coincidence. Think less dirty snowball and more world-sized truss work wrapped in a thin coat of frozen carbon dioxide. If that coat is a meter thick, enough to sublimate convincingly and throw off decoy gas jets, then beneath it you could have cavities, hangars, propulsion tanks, antenna forests, anything you like. Even at a modest internal density, the usable volume would dwarf every human spacecraft ever built combined. The scenario being whispered in closed-door briefings is something straight out of Clark or Niven, an arc, a sentinel, a mobile observatory. Hollow out an asteroid the size of a small mountain, line it with radiation shielding, build habitats and data stores inside, then hide the whole thing under a frozen crust so it looks like any other comet. Let it drift for thousands of years between stars, powered by a drive so efficient it leaves no obvious plume, running on whatever exotic physics your civilization has long since mastered. When it enters a new system, use its mass and inertia to coast past planets while your instruments quietly drink in data. If necessary, slow down behind the system's star, exactly where your prey can't watch you, and either settle into a stable orbit or release smaller payloads. The nickel without iron puzzle makes more sense in this context. Industrial separation, high temperature alloying, materials engineered for temperatures and stresses that would turn ordinary metals to vapor. The absence of iron isn't an oddity, it's a design choice. Nickel-based superalloys are used in our own turbines because they hold their structure at extreme heat. Scale that up by a factor of 1 billion, and you've got a skin or framework that can shrug off millennia in interstellar space, coronal mass ejections, and even impacts with micrometeoroids. Add a sacrificial layer of CO2 ice to bleed off heat and throw decoy jets, and you've built a ghost ship that looks exactly like a comet until you peel back the mask. The most disturbing element of the new telemetry is what's happening around 3I/Atlas, not on it. Deep field optical surveys have picked up a haze of sub-kilometer-sized objects co-moving with it, too faint to see individually, but detectable through occultations of background stars. At first, analysts assumed this was debris from outgassing, but the pattern of movement is wrong. The specks aren't drifting randomly, they're in formation, maintaining fixed distances from each other and from the main body, like a loose cloud of drones. The cloud thickens and thins in a rhythm synchronized to the object's 11-minute reflectivity cycle. You don't need much imagination to guess what that implies: a constellation of microprobes or sensor platforms deploying and retracting as needed. A natural comet shedding dust does not call its dust back into a precise lattice. Add to this the timing of its approach, the 8 millennia travel window, the swing past Mars at the moment our robotic fleet is at its peak, the slip behind the sun exactly at perihelion, and you have a sequence so perfectly aligned it would make a military planner blush. In leaked risk assessments prepared for Deep Guest, one scenario is now explicitly labeled camouflaged sentinel deployment, the idea that 3i/Atlas is not the visitor but the carrier, a Trojan horse whose real payload is smaller and stealthier. While all eyes are on the big object, a second stage could be releasing instruments, pods, or even self-replicating devices into the inner system. We'd never know. Our sensors are focused on the obvious. The covert operation happens in the dark. Engineers at JPL and ESA, working under the polite fiction of academic collaboration, are already trying to model what would happen if an object of that mass and velocity executed a braking maneuver behind the sun. Using only solar gravity assists and a modest thrust from some advanced drive, it could shed enough speed to become co-orbital with Earth or Mars. Done correctly, the maneuver would leave no obvious signature. The comet would emerge in December dimmer, smaller, and on a different path, while whatever was inside it would already be embedded somewhere in our system. Even our most sensitive radar would miss it in the glare of the sun. Why this matters is obvious. If someone else is capable of building and deploying such a craft, then they are capable of monitoring us, influencing us, or worse, without us ever knowing. If the thing is benign, we're being studied like microbes. If it's not, then the opening move of a game we don't understand is already underway. Either way, the comforting narrative of nothing to see here collapses. The universe isn't empty, it's watching, and yet outwardly everything remains calm. Press releases talk of a rare window into interstellar chemistry. Space agencies jockey for telescope time. The public is fed images of a pretty tail against the stars. No one mentions the phased echoes, the nickel alloys, the micro-objects in formation. In the corridors of power, however, the tone is different. Wargame tables are being populated with scenarios in which 3i/Atlas is a probe, a decoy, a seed. Defensive measures, electromagnetic pulses, kinetic interceptors, even nuclear options are being modeled not because anyone thinks they'd work, but because no one can admit there's nothing they can do. Inside that frozen, glinting mountain might be a cathedral of sensors, an alien library, or a dormant intelligence older than our species. Or it might be empty, an autonomous machine patiently fulfilling a mission set in motion before the pyramids rose. Whatever it is, for the first time in human history, we're looking at an artifact that could answer the question of whether we are alone or make us wish we'd never asked. All we can do now is watch the telemetry, listen to the faint heartbeat of its 11-minute pulse, and wait for December to see what emerges from the sun's glare. If we're lucky, it will be nothing more than a comet after all. If we're not, the age of human isolation ended weeks ago, and nobody told us. Every model on every workstation at NASA, ESA, Roscosmos, CNSA, and a dozen military contractors ends the same way, a bright blue line showing the expected hyperbolic exit path of 3i/Atlas, and then a thick red region labeled uncertain beginning the moment the object vanishes behind the solar disk. That red region isn't a neat curve, it's a spray of diverging probabilities, some mundane, some so frightening that even seasoned analysts go silent when they discuss them. No one on Earth will have eyes on the anomaly at perihelion. If it is truly inert, it will whip around the sun, shed a little more ice, and leave forever. But if it's what the off-record briefings call an engineered body, then perihelion is the perfect place to do anything you don't want your target civilization to see. Leaked fragments from an internal ESA risk memo describe 3 credible contingencies. The first is labeled simply Ghost Exit. The object breaks, dims, and disappears into a solar synchronous orbit, becoming a long-term sensor platform hidden in the glare. The second, Seed Dispersal. The crust fractures, not from heating, but from intentional opening, releasing swarms of sub-kilometer craft into heliocentric orbits, each one capable of independent observation or resource extraction. The third, Silent Arrival. A core object separates, executes a tiny course correction hidden by the sun, and emerges on a trajectory, bringing it past Earth within months. No one has said the words collision course out loud, but every analyst who's seen the simulations knows that such a maneuver is physically trivial for a drive powerful enough to cross interstellar space. Why perihelion? The sun itself becomes a cloak. Our radar is blinded by solar noise. Optical telescopes can't point that close without frying their detectors. Even our space-based instruments like Solar Orbiter and Parker Probe are optimized for studying the star, not tracking faint objects slipping past it. In that 2-month window, a civilization with our level of technology could hide a fleet the size of a city. An interstellar civilization could do it without breaking a sweat. By the time we see 3I/Atlas again, its mass, trajectory, and even its appearance could be completely different. The new internal models also attempt, for the first time, to visualize the interior of the object based on the way its surface brightness and thermal emissions respond to solar wind. Those patterns imply voids, vast hollow spaces tens or hundreds of meters across, beneath the thin shell of CO2 ice. In one set of simulations from a European contractor, the interior looks like a honeycomb of cylindrical cavities linked by tunnels. In another, it's a single cavernous void with what could be struts or ribs for structural support. All of them converge on one point. The object's density is far too low for a solid body of its measured mass and size, unless much of its volume is empty or filled with low-density machinery. In plain language, it's not a rock, it's a shell. Think about what could fit inside such a shell. Data cores, storing the entire electromagnetic history of Earth, quietly recorded by probes we never noticed. Biological material for studying our biosphere. Autonomous manufacturing units waiting for a signal. A machine intelligence so old and patient that its perception of time makes our frantic weeks and months meaningless, or nothing at all. A derelict from a civilization long dead, drifting on a mission nobody remembers, its instruments still running out of inertia alone. Any of those possibilities would be enough to upend every assumption our species has about its place in the universe. Meanwhile, new coincidences keep cropping up. Amateur astronomers have reported faint, transient streaks in the sky along the predicted path of 3I/Atlas, streaks that don't match known satellites or meteors. Radio amateurs have detected unexplained, narrow-band signals at frequencies close to deep space communication bands. The official explanations are always prosaic: instrument glitches, terrestrial interference, ordinary space debris, but the timing always lines up with the object's 11-minute light modulation. It's as if a gigantic icy cathedral were ringing a bell we can only barely hear. Inside government circles, the quiet panic has morphed into frantic hedging. Contracts for fast intercept microprobes have been pushed through with emergency funding, even though no such probes yet exist. Emergency task forces have been stood up under names like Horizon Watch and Umbra. In one leaked slide, a bullet point reads simply, "Assume not unique. Prepare for pattern." The implication is obvious. If 3I/Atlas is a sentinel, there are more. This is not first contact, it's first notice. And yet, even in the face of these possibilities, the scientific community remains split between those who still cling to the natural comet hypothesis and those who are quietly bracing for a revelation. Some argue that exotic chemistry, unusual formation zones, and complex rotational dynamics could produce every anomaly without invoking aliens. Others counter that every exotic parameter has to be pushed to its absolute limit, and even then, the statistical odds are laughable. One researcher at a private seminar summed it up with a grim smile. If it quacks like a duck, but the quack is modulated at 11-minute intervals and it weighs 33 billion tons, maybe it's not a duck. The public will get its answer, or at least another clue, when the object re-emerges from behind the sun. Its brightness, its trajectory, and the presence or absence of the mysterious micro-objects will tell us more than any press release. If it's still on the predicted outbound course, the alien probe hypothesis takes a hit, but doesn't die. A sentinel could still use a slingshot to deploy payloads and continue on. If the mass has changed, if the light modulation ceases or shifts, if new objects appear in its wake, then the story changes completely. By Christmas, we may know that humanity's long isolation is over, not because of a radio message from the stars, but because an engineered mountain has coasted past our front porch and taken a good long look inside. Until then, the world waits under a sky that suddenly feels less empty. Scientists watch their instruments, intelligence analysts watch the scientists, and somewhere beyond the sun, a silent, strobing object, older and heavier than anything we've ever seen, drifts in a darkness. It may not even consider dark, deciding or simply executing orders given thousands of years ago on its next move. Inside the classified war rooms, the slides are blunt. They show no artist renderings, no public-facing graphics, just black backgrounds with red arrows and timelines. Across the top of one leaked briefing, Contingency Delta 6, Active Object Emergence. In this scenario, 3I/Atlas does not simply swing around the sun and leave. It sheds mass, its light curve changes, and the new body that comes out is visibly under thrust. The arrow points toward an intersection with Earth's orbit. No one uses the word attack. They don't have to. When a 33 billion ton object can alter its trajectory at will, it has the power of a planet killer just by existing. What frightens the planners is not just impact, it's what an engineered body that size could carry. Imagine a lattice of autonomous machines the size of shipping containers, each one able to manufacture copies of itself from asteroid material, or to interfere with satellites, or to release engineered microbes. Even 1% of 3I/Atlas's mass turned to such devices would give whoever built it an instant, invisible presence throughout the inner solar system. The nightmare slide shows a timeline. T0, emergence from behind the sun. T plus 30 days, dispersal of daughter units. T plus 6 months exponential replication in asteroid belt. T plus 1 year total surveillance of Earth and Mars. No beams, no battles, no Independence Day spectacle, just quiet occupation at a scale we could never undo. Another worst-case branch is signal event. In this model, perihelion isn't about maneuvering, but about charging. The strobing light is a beacon, and at closest approach the object transmits a directed burst of energy, not to us, but outward, a pulse that will reach some other node decades or centuries from now. In other words, 3I/Atlas is not an emissary, it's a sensor. We're not its audience, we're its subject matter. It's here to update a network, to report that the little primates on the third planet have reached the machine age threshold. What follows such a report is anyone's guess. A third scenario discussed under code names like viral seed and anastomosis imagines a more subtle incursion. The core of 3I/Atlas passes on by, but a single pod, something no bigger than a city bus, breaks into Earth orbit disguised as natural debris. With a surface coated in dust and ice, it would be indistinguishable from an inert rock to all but the most sensitive radar. From there, it could begin operations, listening, mapping, releasing nanoscopic probes into the upper atmosphere. We would never know. By the time we did, it would already be here. None of these slides end with victory. Intercepting the main body is almost certainly impossible. It's too massive, too fast, too well armored by nature or design. Intercepting daughter units would require surveillance and response systems we don't have. Some of the most sobering charts don't even deal with attack at all, but with influence, a probe that old and that sophisticated could manipulate our own technology, plant ideas, destabilize systems, or simply observe until the moment it chooses to act. You don't need weapons when your prey builds them for you. Yet despite all this, there's an undercurrent of grim awe in the analyst's notes. If the worst case is true, then we are witnessing an event so far beyond anything in human history that all our fears and plans are almost quaint. We are looking at a machine or organism built by beings who mastered starflight when our ancestors were still chiseling flint. Its decisions are not military maneuvers. They're reflexes of a mind that sees the solar system as we see a petri dish. Its intentions may be neither hostile nor benign, but simply incomprehensible. That, in its way, is the most terrifying scenario of all. And so the world waits. Telescopes are tuned, intercept studies run in secret, a few voices leak hints to the press. Beyond the sun, the object's 11-minute pulse continues like a heartbeat. Somewhere in that pulse, maybe, is an answer, or maybe it's a countdown. In the worst-case simulations, there is no blast, no war cry, no fleet blotting out the stars. There is only a change, quiet, total, and a species that realizes too late it has been living under observation all along. At first it would not look like contact, it would look like a glitch, a faint, narrow-band whisper on frequencies that shouldn't be active, picked up by a handful of amateur radio astronomers sweeping the sky in the dead of night. A slow, rising tone layered under the hiss of cosmic background, repeating at intervals that match the 11-minute heartbeat. They would post it to obscure forums, thinking it was interference, until others thousands of kilometers away posted the same thing at the same times. A week later, professional arrays would confirm it, a signal riding the sidebands of the sun's own radio noise, coming from the far side where 3I/Atlas has vanished. Not a beacon, not a message in any recognizable code, but structured, layered, mathematically dense, a signature of intent. The first public acknowledgement would not come from NASA or ESA. It would come from leaks, screenshots of internal Slack channels, whisper accounts from graduate students, audio clips of panicked phone calls. Words like modulated, carrier, phase-locked would spill into Twitter threads before disappearing. Then, just as suddenly, the signal would stop, but not because it had ended. It would stop because the source had come around the sun and was now in full view, bright as a false star, its tail split into two symmetrical fans like wings. The comet would be visibly different, sharper edges to the coma, discrete jets firing in a pattern, the light curve no longer tumbling but steady. Telescopes that had been trained on empty sky would slew and lock onto it. Photographs would go viral. Everyone with a backyard scope would see it. And for the first time in history, millions of people would look up and say out loud what their leaders have been afraid to say. That's not natural. In the simulation circulating behind closed doors, this is the moment when everything accelerates. Governments scramble to push up launch windows for intercept probes that aren't ready. Military planners switch from observe to assess vulnerability. Stock markets convulse. Religious leaders issue statements. The ordinary public oscillates between awe and panic. Memes of the alien comet flood every feed, but the object just keeps coming, silent, deliberate, shedding ice like smoke from a slow-burning fire. It does not flash a greeting, does not broadcast a translation matrix, does not threaten. It simply behaves as if the solar system is its corridor, and Earth is one door along the way. Contact in this model does not begin with a landing or a transmission. It begins with a change in our own environment. Satellites in high orbit experience unexplained resets. GPS timing drifts by nanoseconds in patterns matching the 11-minute cycle. Submarine cables record faint, coherent noise in their repeaters. It is as if an invisible field has washed across the inner system, not harmful but pervasive, a handshake we cannot interpret. Astronauts on the ISS report bursts of static in their headsets at the same intervals. Sensitive biological experiments detect changes in cell membrane potentials. Everything subtle, deniable, but unmistakable to those tracking it. A planetary scale knock at the door, one we cannot answer in kind. By the time the main body of 3I/Atlas has passed perihelion and is climbing back outward, the real contact may already have happened. Not in a White House lawn landing, but in the quiet infiltration of our electromagnetic environment, in the uploading of a library of our entire digital exhaust, in the seeding of self-reconfiguring sensors throughout cislunar space. The species that built it would not waste energy on theatrics. It would not say we come in peace or we are your overlords. It would simply begin the way we begin an experiment, by turning on the instruments. If humanity is lucky, the next phase is benign, a persistent watchtower parked in a hidden orbit, a slow exchange of signals once we learn how to see them, a long apprenticeship under a cosmic elder. If we are unlucky, we will never know. The probe will move on, or worse, release mechanisms we cannot detect until they have already reshaped our sky. Either way, the moment of contact will feel nothing like the movies. It will feel like waking up to find the walls of your house have shifted overnight, subtly, impossibly, and realizing someone else has been walking the corridors all along. The first instinct would be denial. Governments would issue statements about anomalous but natural phenomena. Papers would appear in journals proposing exotic but still non-technological explanations, and every agency would clamp down on its data. But in the dark corners of intelligence networks, In conference rooms shielded against every form of eavesdropping, the tone would already have shifted from debate to preparation. Every space-capable nation would quietly begin building the same three things: interceptors, hard siloed data centers, and continuity of government facilities designed not for nuclear war, but for information warfare, on a scale never imagined. On the scientific side, the first response would be listening. SETI projects, suddenly showered with emergency funding, would turn every dish skyward. AI models trained on decades of cosmic noise would be repurposed to hunt for patterns in the 11-minute pulses. Teams of mathematicians and linguists would be sworn to secrecy and given petabytes of data to search for structures, grammars, something that could be a message. Private tech companies, the ones with the largest machine learning models and the deepest access to global traffic, would be invited to participate under national security non-disclosures. What began as a fringe project would within weeks become the largest cryptanalytic effort in history. Simultaneously, engineers would be tasked with touching the object. Emergency programs to launch microprobes, even CubeSats lashed to old boosters, would be green-lit despite the near-certain failure of rendezvous. The goal would not be to intercept or damage the object, but to get inside its field, to sense whatever it's doing to our electromagnetic environment from close range. Every agency would know that whatever they launched might never return, but the attempt would be made anyway. A probe that managed even a few seconds of proximity telemetry could become the Rosetta Stone of alien engineering. The military response would be both overt and invisible. Overt, a surge of launches and retaskings of existing satellites, framed to the public as science missions or communications upgrades. Invisible, cyber operations to lock down critical infrastructure, hardening of command and control networks, moving key assets into dark modes disconnected from anything the probe could reach. In the most secretive branches, war-gamed scenarios would unfold in which the object's handshake is actually a prelude to manipulation, changing satellite orbits, corrupting GPS, subtly steering drones or financial systems. No one would say it out loud, but everyone would be thinking the same thing. If it can reach across space, it can reach into our networks. On the public side, a different kind of response would blossom. Amateur astronomers, radio hobbyists, and citizen scientists, now effectively running a parallel observation network, would refuse to be silenced. They would post raw data, share plots, coordinate global campaigns to time occultations, and measure the object's changing brightness. A volunteer, decentralized open SETI would bloom overnight, immune to official suppression, cross-checking everything the agency said. For the first time in history, a planetary-scale science experiment would be unfolding not just in labs, but in living rooms. And then there would be the intangible response, the psychological shift. Religions would splinter and merge, philosophies would mutate, markets would reel. A whole generation raised on the idea of cosmic loneliness would wake up to a sky that was not empty. Some would panic, some would celebrate, some would simply stare up at the night and feel the vertigo of knowing there is a mind out there, so large and patient it sent a mountain of ice and metal across the gulfs to watch us. If contact really was subtle and non-dramatic, humanity's first true interaction might be nothing more than a handshake of information, our instruments feeding it as much as its instruments feed us. We might never see a craft, a being, a structure. We might just see our own sky behave differently, our own machines begin to whisper, our own data streams return echoes from something vast and ancient. In that sense, the response would not be a single action, but a decade-long process of adaptation, a slow acceptance that the universe has walked into our living room and sat down. It starts as a flicker, so subtle that most observatories dismiss it as sensor noise. The 11-minute pulses from 3i/Atlas shift, just enough to break every model trained on weeks of data. Then, across the radio spectrum from 0.3 megahertz up into the terahertz band, a perfectly correlated modulation appears, a low-frequency scaffold carrying a super-dense lattice of high-frequency bursts, each packet exactly 137 microseconds apart, a number so close to the inverse fine structure constant that physicists feel their blood run cold. This is not random. This is not a cosmic ray. This is structured information being beamed into every radio telescope on Earth simultaneously, piggybacking on the object's outgassing like a carrier wave. Within minutes, SETI's private Slack channels explode. The breakthrough listen arrays in South Africa and California both confirm. The Chinese fast dish confirms. A group of high school radio amateurs in Brazil confirm. The signal isn't just detectable, it's unmistakably artificial. It is as though someone has injected Morse code into the solar wind. The modulation repeats every 67 minutes. After 6 repetitions, a pattern emerges. It's not language, not in any sense we'd recognize, but a map, not a map of stars, but a map of our own planetary magnetosphere, rendered with a resolution and precision beyond any Earth-based model. It is, unmistakably, a description of us from an external vantage point. Inside the NSA, GCHQ, PLA's Strategic Support Force, and the European Space Operations Center, secure rooms full of mathematicians and linguists stop trying to sleep. They begin layering de Bruijn sequences, prime factor analyses, Shannon entropies, looking for grammar. After 48 hours, a breakthrough, the modulation's nested structure mirrors prime number sequences, but every nth block contains subtle phase rotations that, when plotted in 3 dimensions, reconstruct the hyperbolic orbit of 3i/Atlas with microsecond accuracy. In other words, the object is telling us where it is, where it's going, and exactly how it sees us, as if to say, we are here. This is how we perceive you. Publicly, NASA still says nothing. The White House convenes its first Situation Room meeting, labeled Category Omega. The Joint Chiefs listen to a briefing by the National Space Intelligence Center. The signal's energy signature implies a transmission power of at least 10 circumflex, 12 watts, but is strangely non-dispersive, as though it's using the solar wind itself as a waveguide. No known physics can do that. The object is not emitting power, it's modulating the medium. The National Reconnaissance Office recommends hardening satellite links. Cybercom recommends isolating SCADA networks. Meanwhile, DARPA is already drafting solicitations for quantum-resistant command and control systems. Outside the walls of secrecy, the Open SETI amateurs don't wait. They begin decoding on their own, building community-driven supercomputing clusters out of idle GPUs. Their working theory, posted on GitHub, is that the signal is a compressed holographic representation of the inner solar system updated in real time. Someone notices that if you deconvolve the carrier with the CME impact signature from last week, the residual resembles a sound, a harmonic series climbing and falling like a breathing organism. Musicians and data artists render it into audio. On YouTube, the first upload of the Atlas song gets 50 million views overnight. The world hears it, and for the first time feels the alien, not as an abstraction, but as a presence. By week 2, the modulations shift again. A sequence of 64 state phase transitions appears, reminiscent of DNA codons, but in base 6 rather than base 4. Molecular biologists at MIT and the Salk Institute stare at the stream and realize the pattern encodes not a genome, but enzymatic pathways, a chemical instruction set for turning carbon dioxide into complex organics at cryogenic temperatures. It's as if the object is handing us a recipe for life in deep space. Simultaneously, the object's tail brightens and then narrows into a coherent beam aimed not at Earth but at Mars, sweeping across the Jezero crater, where Perseverance is still drilling. The first response probes, jury-rigged by SpaceX and Blue Origin under government contracts, so classified that employees think they're working on missile tests, launch from Cape Canaveral and Vandenberg on reused Falcon 9 boosters. They're essentially flying bricks with high-gain antennas and hardened memory. The plan is to slingshot around Mars, intersect the object's tail, and transmit a simple binary reply. Prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, a 1 Hz pulse that says, "We see you." Whether they survive the radiation environment is anyone's guess. Religions split and recombine. Catholic theologians issue encyclics about the universal logos. Buddhist monasteries begin 24-hour chant cycles synchronized to the 67-minute pulse. Conspiracy channels claim it's a deepfake beamed from secret satellites. Meme culture does what meme culture always does, turns the most profound moment in human history into TikToks. But beneath the noise, there's a real shift. Humanity's first planetary-scale conversation. Then, at 4:17 UTC on a Saturday, the signal stops. Every dish on Earth goes silent. 8 minutes later, the magnetometers on 3 separate spacecraft, one at L1, one in Mars orbit, and one on the dark side of the Moon, register a pulse of negative plasma density. The solar wind itself momentarily cancels. 30 seconds after that, the object brightens to magnitude 1, outshining every star except Sirius. For the first time since its discovery, it alters its orbit, a 0.001 degrees delta V, executed with impossible smoothness, putting it on a trajectory that will bring it not just near Mars, but into a co-orbital path with Earth 6 months later. In a single move, the chessboard flips. It has answered. It has changed course. It is coming closer, not as a rock tumbling through space, but as an instrument under control. And the signal resumes, not as a map or a chemical recipe, but as a cascade of tones no model can predict. Pulses nested inside pulses, like fractal time, a rhythm that feels uncannily like language spoken at a speed our minds can't follow. No one can say whether it's greeting, warning, or experiment, but every instrument, every eye on Earth can see the same thing. The interstellar mountain has turned its face toward us, and for the first time, it is speaking. The decision to answer did not come easily. Inside the Situation Room, inside the Kremlin, inside Zhongnanhai, inside bunkers beneath Geneva and Tel Aviv, the arguments went in circles. Do nothing and risk appearing blind, or reply and risk drawing the attention of something we cannot hope to understand. The fear wasn't just of a hostile reaction, it was of acknowledgement. To send a reply was to declare ourselves self-aware, technologically competent, visible. It was to stand up in a crowded, silent forest and shout back at whatever had just rustled the trees. And yet the pressure from outside the walls was irresistible. Amateurs had already cobbled together crude transmitters aimed at the anomaly, beaming primes, pulses, and even music into the void. A group in Chile used a retired military radar to send the first 10 million digits of pi. A ham radio collective in Japan blasted the entire periodic table encoded in Morse. They knew their signals would be drowned by the sun's roar, but the symbolism was enough. Humanity had already answered. Governments could not stay silent while their citizens spoke on their behalf. So the first official transmission was prepared. It was banal in its simplicity, a continuous binary stream of prime numbers, followed by the Arecibo message of 1974, updated with modern data, the DNA helix, the outline of a human, the solar system with Earth highlighted. The hardware was jury-rigged from the Deep Space Network's most powerful dish, normally reserved for commanding Mars rovers. At 1845 UTC, a command sequence was executed. A beam invisible to human eyes, but brighter than a lighthouse in radio terms, lanced out from Earth, riding the solar wind straight into the coma of 3I/Atlas. Humanity had spoken. The world waited. Hours stretched into a day, then two. Nothing. The skeptics sneered. The faithful prayed. The analysts sweated. And then, at 3:02 UTC on the third night, the object answered. Not in hours. Not in days. In minutes. As if it had heard us in real time. As if it had been listening all along. The reply was not noise. It was a mirror. Our signal came back to us, but transformed. The primes were there, but now doubled, tripled, nested in mathematical spirals. The Arecibo message was there too, but rewritten. Not as we sent it, but corrected, expanded, filled with information we had not included. The DNA strand rendered with base pairs, not of 4, but of 6. The human outline annotated with an internal structure, bones, organs, even the electrical activity of the brain. The solar system diagram redrawn, Earth no longer highlighted but pulsing, and beside it a notation no one could decipher, a cluster of glyphs or equations pointing not inward, but outward, toward the stars. The impact was immediate. Linguists, physicists, biologists all claimed pieces of it. Some saw the beginnings of a translation key. Others saw a blueprint. Conspiracy channels shouted that it was a map to invasion. But what united everyone was the shiver. This was not random, not misinterpretation, not wishful thinking. This was dialogue. The probe had heard us, understood us enough to reflect our own message back, and then elevated it into a form we could not fully grasp. Within days, the second volley went out. This time not just from the Deep Space Network, but from every dish on Earth big enough to carry a carrier wave. South Africa, China, Australia, Europe. Even improvised arrays of linked amateur dishes joined in. The messages were chaotic, mathematical conjectures, pictures of Earth's surface, recordings of Beethoven, whale song, the genetic sequence of rice. The chaos was the point. We weren't coordinated. We weren't one. We were 7 billion voices screaming into the dark, begging to be noticed. The next reply was not a mirror. It was new. A steady sequence of base 6 codons, repeated 20 times, then shifting into a cascade of waveforms that, when converted to sound, made the hair on the back of listeners' necks stand up. Biologists realized the codons were amino acid instructions, not for Earth life, but for a hypothetical biochemistry built around solvents other than water, temperatures colder than Antarctica. A roadmap to life in environments we had assumed sterile. It was as though the probe were saying, here is how to live where we come from. In parallel, The waveforms were decoded by physicists into equations describing energy states we could not yet reproduce. One symbol looked like a fusion reaction, but not with hydrogen. Another looked like a stable configuration of matter at negative temperature. Power we couldn't imagine, given to us as casually as a teacher handing a child a new tool. And then came the final twist. On the 10th day of back and forth, the 11-minute light pulse changed. For the first time, the modulation dropped not to zero, but to a pause, a deliberate silence. Every dish on Earth caught it. The pause lasted 67 minutes, then ended with a single, unmistakable emission, a narrow beam, coherent, pointing directly at Earth. Inside it was not data, not math, not biochemistry. It was an image, grainy, abstract, filtered through layers of encoding, but recognizable. A pale blue sphere with swirling white clouds, floating against black. It had sent us a picture of ourselves. The implication was undeniable. We were no longer just listening to an interstellar mountain. We were in dialogue with something that saw us, knew us, and had chosen to show us our own reflection. The image of Earth ripped through every firewall, every clearance level, every attempt at secrecy. A technician at an ESA ground station in Darmstadt, unable to contain herself, posted a frame grab on an obscure Discord server. Within 2 hours, it was on Reddit. Within 6, it was the banner image on every major news site. No leak could be stopped. No narrative could be controlled. The picture was not a NASA photo or a simulation. It bore signatures of a non-human transmission scheme encoded in a base 6-phase lattice no human system had ever used. The algorithms needed to render it were being passed peer-to-peer in real time. Billions of people were literally watching the alien probe's camera through a patchwork of open-source decoders. The public reaction fractured along fault lines that had been building for decades. One half of the world wept openly at the sight, a cosmic selfie proving that yes, something out there not only saw us, but chose to show us to ourselves. The other half panicked. Commentators compared it to a stalker mailing you a photo taken through your window. Religious leaders issued proclamations of cosmic revelation. Others condemned it as a satanic trick. Markets whiplashed. Cryptocurrencies surged on speculation of alien blockchain keys. Defense contractors' stocks spiked. Airlines and shipping companies tanked as rumors of impending invasion spread on Telegram channels faster than governments could issue rebuttals. In capitals around the world, emergency councils met. The UN Security Council, for the first time in its history, convened in a subterranean facility rather than its public chamber. The agenda was simple. What does it mean to be seen? The classified briefings were worse than the public ones. Analysts from NSA and the Five Eyes presented data showing the probe's signal had not only transmitted the Earth image, but a series of low-energy sidebands sweeping across the 1.5 gigahertz band, frequencies used by GPS, satellite telemetry, and aircraft navigation. No interference had been detected yet, but the implication was clear. The thing was mapping our information space in the same way it had mapped our magnetosphere. It knew not only where we were, but how we talked to each other. The public, oblivious to classified nuances, was undergoing its own transformation. A planetary-scale ARG erupted as millions of amateur cryptographers, artists, and coders began poring over the probe's replies, looking for hidden messages. A 19-year-old in Lagos claimed to have found an invitation encoded in the Earth image, a set of coordinates not on Earth, but at a Lagrange point between Earth and the Moon. A Reddit thread dissecting this claim hit 100,000 comments in 24 hours. Every new frame, every modulation spike was dissected, remixed, rendered into sound, turned into TikTok fodder. Memes of our cosmic stalker alternated with hushed live streams where millions sat watching scrolling code in complete silence. Inside labs and think tanks, the debate turned existential. Were we looking at an autonomous probe, like a von Neumann Scout, or a remote-operated drone whose masters were decades of light years away? If it was autonomous, did it have objectives beyond observation? If it was remote-controlled, did its sudden course change mean a decision had been made far away long ago? Astrobiologists, who had spent their careers debating the Fermi paradox, now found themselves on nightly news panels, trying to explain concepts like light-speed latency, probe autonomy, and long-game reconnaissance to a terrified public. And yet, even in the panic, something else was happening, something no intelligence report had predicted. Street demonstrations, not of fear, but of welcome. Candlelight vigils in Berlin, Rio, Jakarta, teenagers in Manila projecting giant prime numbers onto the walls of buildings. Indigenous elders in Australia performing ceremonies to introduce Earth to the visitor. The idea that the probe might be hostile began to seem to some less plausible than the idea that it had come not to conquer, but to teach. A hashtag appeared, #AtlasesUS, and went viral, filled with art, poetry, and mathematical doodles based on the probe's signals. For the first time in living memory, a large portion of humanity was thinking the same thought at the same time. Governments, feeling the tide shift, began coordinating a formal reply, not a scattershot of uncoordinated transmissions, but a unified message representing Earth. Scientists fought over what to include. Politicians fought over who would sign it. Philosophers and theologians fought over whether it should be sent at all. The draft that emerged after a week was the strangest document ever written, a mixture of math and art, genomes and algorithms, human faces and whale songs, our deepest questions encoded as patterns. It wasn't a statement, it was an offering. On the night the unified message went out, a planetary chorus of every dish and transmitter we could muster, the world went quiet. People stood in public squares, in bedrooms, on rooftops, holding phones that streamed the live signal. Some cried, some laughed, some prayed, all listened. The reply, when it came, was unlike anything before. Not a mirror, not a blueprint, not an image, a pulse that rolled through the ionosphere itself, triggering auroras at the equator, rainbow curtains of light over cities that had never seen them. Every magnetometer on Earth spiked. Infrasound detectors registered a tone below human hearing that made animals freeze and tremble. The probe had spoken, not just to our instruments, but to our planet. And the pattern of that pulse, decoded in the days that followed, would upend everything we thought we knew about physics, biology, and our own future. The pulse did not behave like a radio transmission. It was not electromagnetic in any normal sense, nor gravitational, nor acoustic. Instruments across the globe recorded a transient null, a momentary dip in baseline noise, as though the entire planet had been briefly placed inside a cosmic Faraday cage. Then, an aftershock, the Schumann resonances of Earth's ionosphere shifted by precisely 0.618 Hertz, the golden ratio, and remained there. Magnetometers in Antarctica and Norway captured a rising and falling oscillation synchronized to deep ocean currents, as if the visitor had reached through space to pluck the strings of the Earth itself. Within hours, every major data center on Earth was pulling down petabytes of raw telemetry. Amateur sensors, ham radios, smartphones with magnetometer apps, even Fitbit logs showed subtle synchronous anomalies. The pulse had been everywhere at once, like a global watermark, and embedded in that watermark was a pattern, a cascading sequence of prime gaps and Fibonacci spirals that, when plotted as a function of time, traced not a flat diagram, but a rotating three-dimensional structure. A 4D torus unfolding in 3D space, updated every 67 minutes. To mathematicians, it looked like a living Mandelbrot. To physicists, it looked like a phase space diagram of some exotic energy state. To biologists, it looked like a cell division cycle, mitosis rendered in cosmic geometry. Then came the breakthroughs. A team at CERN realized the torus could be projected into 6 dimensions to produce a stable lattice that matched no known crystal, but predicted a set of resonant frequencies in the terahertz band. When those frequencies were used to modulate a simple superconductor, the material's critical temperature jumped by 50 degrees Kelvin. Labs at MIT and Tsukuba confirmed the result. In one night, the Atlas pulse had handed humanity a roadmap to room temperature superconductivity, a dream that had eluded science for a century. The pulse wasn't just a message, it was a technology drop. At the same time, a group at the Salk Institute noticed that the base 6 codons embedded in the torus corresponded to hypothetical metabolic pathways for turning CO2 and nitrogen into complex organics at Wiener 150 degrees C. Combined with the earlier enzyme patterns from the probe's signal, the pulse formed a complete blueprint for an extremophile biosystem, life engineered to survive interstellar space. It was as if the visitor were saying, "This is how we travel the gulfs between stars. This is how you can too." More disturbing was a discovery from a think tank in Bangalore. Hidden in the modulation sidebands of the pulse was a sequence of numbers matching the rotational periods of Earth's tectonic plates and polar ice mass fluctuations projected decades into the future. In other words, the pulse contained a prediction, a highly accurate climate tectonic forecast extending to the end of the century. If correct, it implied not only knowledge of our planet's current state down to microns, but the ability to model chaotic systems with impossible precision. The final frames of the forecast showed an unmistakable icon, a spiral leaving Earth's orbit and heading outward. Governments tried to keep the implications classified, but the open science community pieced it together anyway. GitHub filled with decoding scripts, hackers live-streamed the torus rotations in augmented reality. Artists turned the pulse into holographic sculptures. Children memorized the prime sequences like prayers. The visitor had reached past our leaders and spoken directly to our species. On the geopolitical stage, alliances began to shift. The US, China, Russia, and the EU quietly formed a joint working group, the first real planetary council, to coordinate the response. They gave it an unassuming name, the Interstellar Contact Framework. Its mandate was to build a probe using the technology embedded in the pulse that could leave the solar system within a human lifetime and transmit back. In other words, humanity's first attempt to speak not just by radio, but by presence. But the pulse also had a psychological effect no one had anticipated. Suicide rates dipped globally, conflicts froze, stock markets stabilized, not from manipulation, but from a strange collective sense of future. People who had been paralyzed by climate anxiety, war, and political rage suddenly found themselves thinking about centuries rather than news cycles. For the first time in living memory, the species looked up, and yet behind the scenes, the old fears persisted. In a basement at Langley, analysts pored over a classified annex to the decoded pulse. Buried in the noise floor was an intermittent subcarrier that didn't match the torus, the codons, or the forecasts. When rendered into a spectrogram, it produced a silhouette, not of a comet, not of Earth, but of something vast and architected orbiting far beyond the Kuiper belt. A shape with angles, not curves, a thing that had been waiting. The analysts gave it a code name, the Lurker. The public never heard about the annex, but for those inside the circle, the pulse was no longer just a gift, it was also a summons. The probe had shown us our reflection, handed us tools, seeded us with knowledge, and then in the noise floor pointed to something else, something out there, something that might be expecting us. It began as a rumor, a handful of engineers at JPL whispering about an unfunded project called Keystone, a CubeSat swarm built around an experimental drive nobody had seen before. Then, 6 months after the Atlas Pulse, the rumor became a leak, an internal memo from the new Interstellar Contact Framework describing a joint exploratory platform with a launch window tied not to any Earth orbit, but to a point far beyond Pluto. The coordinates matched the silhouette in the annex, the thing the analysts had named the Lurker. The leaked memo described a spacecraft unlike anything humanity had ever built. It would be small by alien standards, no bigger than a shipping container, but inside its black carbon shell would be the first working implementation of the physics encoded in the Atlas Pulse, a field drive that bent the vacuum itself to create thrust without propellant. Powered by a room-temperature superconductor no textbook had ever imagined. It would launch not on a chemical rocket, but on a new hybrid stage, developed in secret by a U.S.-Chinese consortium, a reusable booster so powerful it could fling payloads at escape velocity without planetary assists. The mission's public cover name was Aurora, billed as a test of deep space navigation. In reality, it was humanity's first interstellar handshake by presence. The design was simple and audacious, a drive core, a dish, a library. The dish would beam a continuous version of the unified Earth message, math, art, DNA, whale song, on the carrier frequency used by 3i/Atlas. The library would hold everything we could compress into a few petabytes, our sciences, our histories, our languages, our mistakes, and mounted on the outer skin, facing outwards, a plaque, a rendering of the silhouette from the annex, the shape of the Lurker, and a single phrase in binary prime code, "We come to you." The weeks leading up to launch felt like living inside a myth. Open source forums tracked every supply shipment to Cape Canaveral and Baikonur. Drone footage of anonymous black modules being rolled into clean rooms went viral. Governments didn't deny it. They didn't confirm it either. But for once, secrecy wasn't about hiding something from the public. It was about trying to preserve a shred of control over an event that had already become planetary. On a cold morning, just before dawn, with no televised countdown, the first stage of Aurora rose on a pillar of fire that looked different from any rocket launch before, a shimmering, almost silent plume, plasma braided like Aurora Borealis. There was no grand speech, no flags, just a few words transmitted on every frequency at once. "We are leaving." The booster dropped away at high altitude, and the second stage lit. At that moment, the drive core activated. Instruments went crazy. The ship did not accelerate in the usual sense. It slid, smoothly, impossibly, as if the space around it had tilted. Within minutes, it was past the moon, hours later past Mars, days later out of the inner system. For the first time, human-made hardware was moving at a fraction of a percent of light speed, not by coasting, but by sustained thrust. For months, Aurora coasted in a straight line toward the coordinates encoded in the pulse. The world followed its telemetry like a heartbeat. There were no more attempts to hide it. Schools ran Aurora hours. Artists painted murals of the little black ship plunging into the dark. It became the symbol of a species that, after millennia of looking up and wondering, was finally taking a step outward, not in conquest, but in curiosity. As the probe passed beyond the heliopause, strange things began to happen. Its instruments started picking up a faint standing wave in the interstellar medium, a resonance at the same frequencies embedded in the Atlas pulse. The deeper it went, the stronger the resonance grew, like a path laid out before it. The telemetry showed fluctuations, not random, but patterned, steering the ship ever so slightly toward a new set of coordinates. Someone or something was guiding it. On Earth, the decoding teams worked around the clock. A small group of mathematicians at the University of Helsinki noticed that the guidance pattern matched an ancient Sumerian star chart, the same one that had led early astronomers to map the heavens. Coincidence, archetype, or a deliberate nod from a non-human intelligence, no one could say, but the pattern pointed to a destination, a point in the Oort cloud where no known object existed, a blind spot in our surveys. As Aurora approached the coordinates, its cameras began to pick up shadows, absences of starlight, arcs of black against black. At first, the analysts thought it was noise. Then the shapes resolved. Structures. Not one, but dozens. Slender arcs kilometers long, curved like the bones of an impossible whale, forming a lattice around nothing, drifting in a slow, silent dance. They reflected almost no light. Only when Aurora turned its sensors to active did the structures flicker with faint phosphorescence, as though awakening. The last telemetry from Aurora came not as numbers, but as a compressed burst, a packet of data so dense it took Earth computers days to unpack. Inside was a single image, a tunnel of arcs receding into infinity, the lattice bending inward toward a dark center, a doorway or a throat. And just before the stream cut off, a new signal, on the same carrier frequency used by 3I/Atlas, this time unmistakably addressed back to Earth. 3 pulses, a pause. 3 pulses, a pause. Over and over. In Morse, it would have been SOS. In mathematics, it was prime. In human terms, it felt like an invitation. On Earth, the decoding teams stared at their screens. The probe had found the lurker. The lurker had answered. And now, for the first time, the abyss was not just looking back, it was calling us in. The 3-pulse signal spread across the planet faster than any news story in history. Even before the packet from Aurora had been fully decoded, the pattern had already gone viral. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause. On TikTok, it was rendered into music. On Reddit, it was turned into ASCII art. On news channels, it scrolled as a ticker under every broadcast. Children tapped it on desks. Soldiers drummed it on rifle stocks. Monks wove it into chants. Humanity had received not just a message, but a rhythm, the simplest of invitations, repeated endlessly by something waiting in the dark. Inside governments, the invitation was treated with dread. To the analysts at Langley, Vandenberg, and Beijing, 3 pulses was not a greeting, but a test, a binary handshake, a beckoning into a trap. Every briefing began with the same grim disclaimer. We do not know the intent. The possibility of ambush could not be dismissed, yet neither could the possibility that this was the next step in contact. Do nothing, and we risked silence. Answer, and we risked annihilation. The debate fractured into three camps. The first, the isolationists, argued that humanity should cut transmissions, shut down receivers, and retreat into silence, as if hiding in the galactic woods might make us invisible again. The second, the diplomatists, insisted that refusing the invitation was more dangerous than accepting it, that in cosmic terms, to ignore a signal is to show hostility. And the third, the ascensionists, saw the pulses as a once-in-civilization chance, a doorway not to fear, but to step through boldly, even recklessly. For them, the three pulses were not a trap, but a summons to join the wider network of intelligence threaded through the galaxy. While leaders argued, the public had already decided. Across every continent, crowdfunding campaigns began to pour money into open-source space projects. Engineers in Bangalore, Buenos Aires, and Lagos began sketching designs for community probes, small bootstrapped missions to piggyback on private rockets. Hackers live-streamed blueprints for drive systems derived from the Atlas Pulse. Amateur astronomers pointed arrays at the Oort cloud and shared data in real time. Humanity was no longer waiting for permission from states. The crowd had chosen. The invitation would be answered. And yet, behind the curtain, preparations were already underway for something larger. The interstellar contact framework, emboldened by the success of Aurora, accelerated construction on Keystone 2, a full-scale crewed vessel built around the alien drive principles. Its hull took shape in orbit, modules ferried up by reusable boosters, welded together by robotic arms. Officially, it was a next-generation deep space habitat testbed. Unofficially, it was Earth's first ark, designed for a one-way journey into the dark lattice the probe had found. Whispers of a crew list leaked, a mix of astronauts, linguists, mathematicians, biologists, and, controversially, soldiers. For the first time in history, humans were preparing not just to look at an alien doorway, but to walk through it. The invitation pulses continued. 3 beats, pause. 3 beats, pause. Always the same, always steady, like a cosmic heartbeat. But as weeks passed, analysts noticed subtle variations. Occasionally the pause would lengthen by microseconds. Occasionally the signal would overlay faint harmonics at exact multiples of hydrogen's spectral line. A graduate student in Peru noticed that when graphed over time, the variations formed a spiral that pointed not outward, but inward toward the black center of the lattice. The message was clear: come closer. When this finding leaked, the world split. Protests erupted in London, Mumbai, Chicago, millions demanding that humanity stay home, fearing that to approach the lattice was to offer ourselves as prey. At the same time, vigils filled streets in Seoul, Lagos, São Paulo, millions praying for humanity to take the step, to trust that whatever had built the lattice had chosen us for something greater. Civilization itself felt like it was vibrating to the same 3-beat rhythm, torn between awe and terror. And then, one night, the object we still called 3I/Atlas stuttered. Its 11-minute heartbeat faltered, shifted, then locked onto the same 3-pulse rhythm being broadcast by the lurker. The two signals merged into a duet across space. The visitor that had entered our solar system and the ancient sentinel waiting beyond it, now speaking in unison. The effect on Earth was electric. Whatever these two entities were, they were coordinated. the message could no longer be dismissed as anomaly or accident. It was orchestration. By morning, the decision had been made. Keystone Sioux would launch within 2 years. The mission profile was rewritten. Not a test bed, not a decoy, but a response, humanity's step toward the doorway. The launch date, though classified, was already whispered in academic circles. Historians compared it to 1492, to Apollo 11, to the first fire lit by human hands. Psychologists warned of mass hysteria. Economists predicted collapse, but all of that was drowned out by the rhythm. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause. The invitation continued, steady, patient, relentless, and in the silence between those pulses, the most dangerous question grew louder every day. What waits for us inside? The ship had been in orbit for months, a glinting black silhouette drifting just beyond the reach of civilian telescopes. Officially, it was still the Deep Space Habitat Demonstrator. Unofficially, it was Keystone 2, the first crewed vessel built around alien physics, the first human machine designed to leave the solar system, not by coasting, but by gliding along a geometry, whispered to us in a pulse from the dark. Its hull was a seamless exoskeleton of the new nickel superconductor alloy, derived from the Atlas pulse, layered with ablative carbon foam, and covered in a skin of mirrored foil to shed solar heat. Inside, 5 decks, a spin-gravity habitat, a biolab, a command module, a field drive core surrounded by cryogenic tanks, and at the center, a vault lined with gold foil. The library, a crystalline data store containing a snapshot of Earth as of the day of launch. The crew list, kept secret until the last minute, leaked anyway. 12 souls, not the elite fighter pilots the public expected, but a deliberately odd mix, a Kenyan linguist who had cracked the base 6 codons, a Peruvian graduate student who had first plotted the spiral hidden in the pulses, an Indian biologist who had deciphered the enzyme pathways, a Russian plasma physicist who had built the drive's containment field, a South Korean engineer who had welded the ship's skeleton in orbit, a Brazilian pilot with thousands of hours in vacuum-rated simulators, a pair of American ex-astronauts, 2 Europeans, and controversially, a Chinese naval officer and a Nigerian sociologist. A microcosm of Earth's brains and hearts and fears. Launch day was unannounced, but the world knew. Telescopes tracked the pre-launch maneuvers. Amateur radio hounds heard the encrypted checklists. Crowds gathered in public squares, on beaches, on rooftops. They weren't there to see a rocket plume. Keystone 2 was already in orbit, but to listen, all across the planet, people tuned in to the live telemetry feed, a slow heartbeat of numbers, like a countdown in an alien language. Then, at 4:33 UTC, the heartbeat changed. A rising tone, inaudible to human ears but visible on spectrograms, blossomed from the ship's field drive core. No bright flame, no roar, just a ripple of aurora across the ship's hull as the drive bent the local vacuum. Instruments on Earth showed a momentary dip in geomagnetic background. In the dark above the equator, Keystone 2 tilted, its antenna flared, and with a smoothness no chemical rocket could match, it began to slide outward, accelerating without thrust. Within an hour, it was past the moon. Within a day, past Mars. The solar system's inner planets fell behind, like lights receding down a tunnel. For weeks, the ship coasted along the invisible path laid out by the pulses. The 3-beat invitation still rolled in from the lurker. Every time it arrived, the crew's instruments adjusted minutely, like a GPS signal from another civilization. The field drive held, life support held. The crew streamed back brief messages, mathematical notations, prime spirals, tiny fragments of music encoded in telemetry bursts. Earth answered back. For the first time, not just machines but humans were conversing with something beyond the edge of the known. And then the stars began to dim. Cameras on Keystone 2 showed not darkness, but the absence of stars, arcs of black against black, curving inwards. The lattice. It was not a single structure, but a field of them, slender struts kilometers long, curving into parabolic arcs, linked by gossamer filaments that glowed faintly in the ship's own radar. They formed a tunnel, or a throat spiraling inward toward a point of perfect darkness. The ship's magnetometers spiked. The pulses from the lurker shifted from 3 beats to 4, then back to 3, a pattern like breathing. Inside the command module, the crew fell silent. For months they had lived with numbers, graphs, and distant pulses. Now the thing itself loomed before them, an engineered corridor wide enough to swallow moons, built from materials that drank starlight and whispered in frequencies below the reach of human hearing. The lurker was not a single object, but a station, a gate, a construct. It dwarfed the ship, dwarfed their imaginations. Every training drill they had rehearsed felt like a child's game in the shadow of a cathedral. On Earth, the telemetry stream continued. Billions watched as the cameras panned across the arcs. Memes stopped. Markets paused. Even the constant roar of social media went quiet. For the first time since the pulses began, the world was united, not in speculation, but in wordless awe. Humanity was seeing, through the eyes of its own emissaries, the architecture of something that had been waiting for it for millennia. Then the invitation changed. The pulses ceased. In their place came a single, low-frequency tone that rolled through the ship's hull like a heartbeat you could feel in your bones. The lattice ahead glowed faintly along its inner edge, tracing a path spiraling toward the dark center. Keystone 2's autopilot flagged a course correction, a gentle nudge, as though being guided. The captain looked at the crew. The crew looked at the captain. They had trained for this moment, argued about it, written protocols. But there was no real precedent. In every simulation, this was the point of no return, the decision to enter the throat. The captain's hand hovered over the manual override. Earth waited, silent. With a calm, deliberate motion, the captain disengaged the override. Keystone 2 drifted forward, following the glowing path into the spiral. The lattice began to close behind them, arcs folding like petals. The last telemetry burst from the ship was a cascade of data in a single image, the black center ahead opening like an iris of stars. And then the stream cut. For 97 seconds after the telemetry cut, Earth received nothing. Then, a burst. Not the clean, structured packets of before, but a flood of corrupted frames. Static frames of video scrambled into kaleidoscopic noise. Analysts thought it was failure, a drive collapse, a hull breach. But when the data was slowed, filtered, stabilized, something emerged beneath the chaos. Shapes, not stars, not arcs, a field of light suspended in void, arranged not randomly, but in a geometry that seemed to shift every time you blinked. The best description anyone on Earth could give was this: it looked like flying through the inside of a living equation. Inside the ship, the crew were strapped into their stations, eyes wide not with fear, but with an awe so total it bordered on religious paralysis. The viewports, filtered to prevent retinal burn, showed a corridor of impossible depth. The lattice struts they had seen from outside were now glowing from within, not with reflected starlight, but with something self-luminous, a current, a flow, like plasma being shepherded along channels. Except the plasma wasn't heating or scattering. It was coherent. It pulsed in fractal rhythms that matched the Fibonacci spirals of the Atlas pulse. The lattice wasn't a gate. It was a machine, still running after who knew how many millennia. Then came the first voice, not a sound in the air, but a vibration in the bones. The ship's hull thrummed at 17 hertz, just below human hearing, making teeth chatter and vision blur. Every instrument on the ship registered it as a standing wave. Not electromagnetic, not gravitational, something new. The crew reported pressure in their chests, flashes of memory not their own, childhood homes they had never lived in, languages they had never spoken, faces they had never seen. One screamed. Another wept. The captain clenched the armrest until his knuckles bled. It was not communication as humans understood it. It was recognition. The machine was not just showing them something. It was reading them. Back on Earth, the telemetry feed picked up fragments hidden in the corrupted burst. A sequence of primes nested inside Mandelbrot sets. A base 6 codon chain that when translated described the exact metabolic pathways of the crew's own gut bacteria, and a rotating model of the solar system with Earth highlighted, but not as it was today, as it was 12,000 years ago. The implication was staggering. The lattice had been here all along, watching, waiting, archiving. Keystone 2 had not discovered it. It had simply triggered its memory. Inside, the ship drifted deeper. The corridor opened into a chamber the size of a moon, its walls laced with arcs and spheres of light. Objects floated within, not debris, not asteroids, but vessels. Dozens, hundreds. Some were jagged, metallic, scarred, and others were smooth, crystalline, as if grown rather than built. Many were shattered, dormant, silent, but a few glowed faintly, emitting the same 3-beat invitation that had drawn humanity here. The lattice was not just a machine. It was a harbor, a graveyard, a library of visitors. The linguist, eyes wide, whispered into the calm, "We're not the first." The words carried across Earth seconds later, triggering a wave of silence so deep it swallowed entire cities. Not the first, not alone. The chamber was full of ships from other times, other worlds, other failed or successful attempts at contact, some older than recorded history, some newer, still warm in their glow. Humanity had stepped into a cosmic archive, and then one of the glowing vessels moved. Not with thrust, not with jets, it simply shifted, like a thought, gliding across the chamber until it hovered in front of Keystone 2. Its surface rippled, and in that ripple appeared shapes unmistakable to human eyes. The 12 crew, standing in silhouette. The object was reflecting them, recording them, adding them to its collection. For the first time, humans were not just observers of the lattice, they were entries within it. The captain, trembling, raised a hand to the viewport. The reflection raised its hand back. In that instant, every system on the ship went dark. No lights, no hum of fans, just silence. And then slowly, the reflection smiled. The stream cut again. On Earth, billions stared at blank screens. In labs and control rooms, scientists screamed at dead telemetry feeds. But hidden deep in the last packet was a single frame, compressed beyond recognition until decoded days later, a lattice of arcs stretching not into blackness, but into a spiral of stars humanity had never charted. A map, a destination. In the days that followed, silence became its own kind of message. The frantic chatter of instruments, the cascade of raw telemetry, the bursts of alien mathematics, all of it ceased. Keystone 2 was gone, or hidden, or transformed, and Earth was left with only the echoes. At first there was panic, governments demanding answers, scientists demanding data, families demanding proof of life. But gradually, the absence settled into something quieter. A hush, not of despair, but of reverence. For the first time in human history, the whole planet seemed to inhale together and hold its breath. The data fragments decoded from the final burst spread like pollen on the wind. The map, the lattice, the silhouettes of other ships, these were no longer state secrets. They belonged to everyone. Children traced the arcs in school books. Artists painted murals of the spiral harbor. Musicians wove the three-beat pulse into songs of mourning and hope. It was as if the entire species had been handed a story too vast for any one culture to own, and so it became a story for all of them. The scientists did not stop. In labs from Boston to Beijing, equations scratched into notebooks late at night began to describe drive systems more stable than anyone thought possible. Biologists tinkered with enzyme chains hinted at in the pulse. Mathematicians explored fractals nested so deep they seemed to breathe. But even they worked with a new humility, aware now that every breakthrough was not discovery, but inheritance, gifts left by hands unseen. Politicians, too, spoke differently. For once, speeches about unity did not sound hollow. Even cynics admitted that the old rivalries seemed smaller in the shadow of what had been revealed. The wars did not vanish, the greed did not evaporate, but a new question hovered above everything. What does it mean to be noticed? The answer was still unclear, but the awareness of the question lingered in every chamber of power, in every newsroom, in every home. And among ordinary people, the change was subtler still. Nights were filled with new habits, heads tilted toward the sky, listening, as though waiting for the next pulse. Families camped under the stars, telling children that somewhere out there was a harbor where ships slept and stories waited. Farmers looked at their fields differently, thinking of enzymes that could grow life in places colder than space. Even in the noise of daily life, there was a softness, a pause, a glance upward. The universe was no longer an empty stage. It was a library, and for the first time we knew we had a card on its shelves. Whether the crew of Keystone 2 lived on, whether they walked the halls of the lattice, or became shadows among the silhouettes, no one could say. But their names became myth, spoken in the same breath as the first sailors, the first moonwalkers, the first who dared to leave the cave. They had stepped through the doorway, and in doing so they had changed what it meant to be human. The pulses did not return, the lattice remained unseen, the silence stretched on, but it was no longer the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a page turned, a story not yet finished. Somewhere out there, beyond the arcs and spirals, beyond the harbor of civilizations, was a destination, a place we had been invited to find. The map remained, the invitation lingered, and so humanity did what it has always done when faced with the unknown. We looked at one another, we looked at the sky, and we began to prepare.